and I wish you all the best for the good health going forward as well. Coming to our topic for the day, where we are talking about our global fund as well as global investing. I brought across a few slides as well to tell you what this fund and what our fund house is all about, what's the philosophy like, and as Akshay pointed out, how it fits well for domestic investors also. First, coming to our fund house. So ours is Prudential Financial Inc. of US, managing a total of $1.5 trillion of assets and the top 10 asset managers in the world. It is the only top 10 asset manager in the world which has a full 100% unit out here in India. $1.5 trillion sounds a big number, but to put in context, it is almost 4 times the size of Indian mutual fund industry size. So that's the kind of context we are in. Multiple offices everywhere and a track record of over 140 years in the history. When we see the management style of PGM, we have multi-manager model. There are multiple verticals for each type of asset class. For the fund in question here is about fundamental equity, which is handled by the second bar that you see, PGIM Jennison Associates, which is handling the fundamental equity piece, having a total AUM of around $224 billion. Within PGIM Jennison Associates, the team that is looking at these equity side of the funds, that's a total strength of over 300 people. 341 people is the total, but 68 of them are investment team. And average experience of a person in the investment team, the fund managers and the analysts combined, is about 15 years plus. The average experience of the fund managers is over 25 years. So when we look at the fund managers for this particular fund who are actually taking decisions in US, it's Mr. Mark Beribu and Mr. Thomas Davis. And again, both of them have an experience of over 20, 25 years, each of them. Coming to our fund straight away so that I can cut down to as to what to expect in this fund. Before I get into the details, I must tell you one part that global investing has got more momentum in the last few years than it was in the last 10, 15, 20 years. The prime reason is that 15, 20 years ago, when we used to invest anywhere outside India, the thought process was that India was growing at a faster pace, those countries are not growing at a faster pace, and most importantly, the largest companies out there were the likes of Caterpillar or ExxonMobil, and most of us may not even recognize their logos properly. It had no impact on our daily lives. Even if those companies were not in operation for some time or were to shut down, it did not impact our lives. But the largest companies in the world today are those companies that have started impacting our lives. Imagine spending one single day if all the services of Microsoft, Android, that is Google, and Apple were to be switched off. Imagine how will our work from home work? How will our laptops or iPads or even phones work? So they have started entrenching our lives so much that we have started consuming their services or products in a large way. And when you have such a great combination of products and services which you are consuming, you might as well participate in those companies as owners to ride their growth trajectory also. That's the context. Plus, as we speak, the Indian asset class and the Indian equity assets or the Indian market cap is barely 3% of global market cap. So while we have exposure to equity assets, ignoring international investments means you are ignoring 97% of the asset class itself. So it's very important that for pure diversification purposes and to harness the opportunity, the growth opportunity offered by lot of these companies which are based abroad, we should participate in them by having some allocation from our overall equity piece. Now, in that context, we come to our fund. The benchmark for our fund is MSCI All Country World Index. It has more than 2000 stocks in the benchmark itself. But instead of going by the benchmark, a lot of long only funds go by benchmark. First, they decide which country they will be overweight, underweight, which stock or sector they will be overweight, underweight, and then they come to stock. We don't follow that process. Our idea is leave those 2200 companies. can we find 35 to 45 of the best ideas from anywhere in the world? We keep a cutoff of about $5 billion in market cap, so that's almost a large cap company. But can we find 35 to 45 of our best ideas from all over the world and then put them in the fund? So it's a very, very high conviction and a concentrated fund from that angle. Most global funds will have hundreds of stocks in the portfolio. So the fund at the outset does not care how much weight is there for a particular country in the index, how much weight is there for a particular sector in the index, how much weight is there for a particular stock in the index. It is completely agnostic of the benchmark weights for country, sector, and stock. So that's where we are. Then comes the second important philosophy for the fund, which is about growth investments. We like to invest in those areas which are likely to offer long term or structural growth. When we talk about long term or structural growth, we are not just looking at what is the likely growth for next 1 quarter or 2 quarters or maybe next 1 year. We are more interested in, is this segment of business in which the company is operating and the potential of this company, does this have the potential to give a long runway of growth, maybe of say 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? In that, if that answer to that is yes, then we are interested, because that's where the big opportunities come in. I'll take through a few examples here. Some of the themes, these themes are those where we are very bullish. A large part of our fund is invested here. And most of these themes are actually not available for investments in India, at least directly. One of those themes is on-demand consumption. Today, we are so used to it that we, on the click of a button, we want to achieve the service that we want to. When we want to watch a movie, we want to watch the movie of our choice at the time we want. And if we want, we can pause and then see it later. That has become very, very common with all of us. Especially in COVID times, it has become a catalyst and the consumptions have gone up even more. Those were the days, a lot of us may remember that a movie used to come on a Doordarshan once in a week. And the choice was also with the broadcaster, which movie he wants to show, whether we want to see it or not. But things have changed over a period of time. Whether it is a mobile phone or a laptop or a television, we want to watch things on demand. That's the key word. Similarly, in shopping, earlier, the shopping used to be going to the shop and buy the stuff. Then came the malls across the cities. And then going to the malls for shopping and browsing was the idea. But slowly, steadily, and I would say, in fact, quite quickly, the convenience of shopping from home has also picked up, especially for any kind of items, from the safety pin to a big, big machine, can all be bought online at the click of a button. These are on-demand consumption. The first name that comes to the mind when it is on-demand entertainment, it is Netflix. The first name that comes to the mind for on-demand shopping, it's the likes of Amazon or Flipkart, which itself is Walmart. These are the names that comes to the mind. But there are few more areas which are picking up in on-demand consumption, not really there in listed space, are the likes of on-demand consumption for education. A lot of us were forced. We saw kids struggling through the days, day in, day out, and learning things on the go, on the mobile or on the laptop itself. And a host of services have started coming in to teach you things while at home, and you can go through the sessions and learn things. And that has actually crossed global barriers as well. So these things become extremely important. And this is a phenomena that has really been catching up. It is not a near-term phenomena. Let me take you an example. Let's take an example of railway ticket booking. Say if you go back 20, 25 years ago, at that time, to book a railway ticket, we had to go to a railway counter, stand in a queue, get the form to fill up the form, pay the amount, and then get the tickets. That used to be the norm. But out of sheer convenience, things moved online, and IRCTC actually at one point became one of the busiest e-commerce platforms. out of sheer convenience, I don't think anybody these days goes to a railway counter to book a railway ticket or goes to an airline counter to book an airline ticket. Things have changed. That was out of convenience. Now with the more and more penetration of internet, more awareness, more literacy around computers, and catalysts like COVID, things have picked up even more. But the story doesn't end there. When you have some event changing, some tectonic shift happening inside the investment or the consumption landscape, the whole value chain changes. If there's a change in value chain, now let's look at how other players fit in. If the consumer wants to consume online, the supplier also has to provide it online. And if suppliers want to provide online, they need to have real-time data of all their inventories, various places, how much time will it take to deliver if there's a good, and what is the customer login details, the customer preferences, everything is required on real time. And that is possible through cloud technology, through enterprise technologies. Not many of us are aware that the prime cash cow, the main cash flows for Amazon comes from its cloud business and not from its shopping business. So these are very, very big beneficiaries of online consumption picking up. Similarly, one more leg is if the suppliers are online, the consumers are online, the vendors are online, then all the payments also need to be done online. And if payments are done online, they're digital payments. For every swipe of a credit card, a fee goes to a Visa or a MasterCard. For these days, there's a lot of wallet related payments also. The leading wallet payment solutions provider in the world is not a US company. It's a company based out of Netherlands by the name of Adyen. And it's one of our top holdings in our fund also. Now, if payments are done online, consumers are online, the suppliers are online, the smaller businesses also want to be online. Big companies have their IT departments to make things go online, but not every small company, a small partnership or a small proprietorship firms, they may find it difficult to take things online. There comes the role of the market leader, which is a Canadian company, not a US company, by the name of Shopify. And this company helps you transform your offline business into online business, to make it through the apps, to showcase your products online, and where it can be showed to the multiple class of audience, maybe multiple countries as well. So one theme, but there are so many parts in the value chain, and everywhere there's some winner. And to spot them is the key. That's what we do. So we are not interested in whether a company is likely to grow at 10, 20% in next 1 year and after that visibility not being there. That is a commodity game, not really interested out there. Similarly, let me take one other example. Everything is not about online. Let me take another example. Over the last 100 plus years, the vehicles, the cars have been moving on petrol, diesel, or gas. Most automobile companies which use this technology, which is called internal combustion engine, they are talking about a few percentage points growth every year for the next decade. If they are successful, they will be able to grow in some percentage points. Otherwise, they may degrow. But when you look at electric vehicles, every government in the world is wanting to focus on electric vehicles and is wanting to develop electric vehicles. So that segment, that's the key change in the way automobiles would be working and produced and bought over in the world in the coming decade. So while internal combustion engine companies are talking about a few percentage points growth, the electric vehicle industry is likely to multiply over this period. The leader in this segment, again, there are multiple companies. The company that is leading the imagination, I'm sure most of you have already guessed, the company's name is Tesla. It is the two largest auto markets of the world, US and China, both the places it is very popular. There are other companies also. There's a Rio in China, which is doing very well. In fact, Renault in France is also doing very well on the electric side. Toyota has developed a lot of hybrid engines, is also going into the electric engines as well. They have the capabilities. So, but the winner, the theme is there for a high growth pitch, but the winner out there for us is Tesla, which has done extremely well for us in the fund also, and we own them also. Not just this, there are multiple other themes in the fund. Even if you look at the way the consumption is done, lot of younger population these days have a higher disposable income. And when you have higher disposable income, you want to spend it and consume it on brands. And hence the appeal for global brands is likely to be there. There are brands which are high ticket brands like Louis Vuitton products or a Hermes International or a Ferrari. Then you have brands like Givaudan, which is the biggest fragrance company in the world, especially in the Switzerland. Then there are slightly mass-oriented brands as well, the likes of Adidas, Nike, etc. So these products, these brands have a global appeal. You be anywhere in the world, but you like to consume these kind of products. And we see a great growth trajectory for these kind of companies. A lot of these companies have also shown this growth in the last decade, and we expect this growth to continue in future as well. And we are participating there. You may have heard all these names that I took. Coincidentally, none of them are US, at least most of them are not US companies, especially Louis Vuitton, Hermes, Jordan, or a Ferrari, none of them. So why I'm stressing on this point also is we are not bothered whether a company is in technology or not. We are not bothered whether a company is in US or not. All we are bothered is, does the runway for a high growth for 5, 10 years exist? And do we have a credible player to run on that highway runway and give us that higher growth? If the answer to both is yes, we would like to explore further and invest there. Similarly, when we talk about pharmaceuticals, barring recent times where there's a lot of demand for antibody drugs, etc., and lot of vitamins as well. But in general, the path-breaking work there is in the form of robotic surgeries. In India, also robotic surgeries have come in few cities, in a few therapies. But over a period of time, more and more surgeries are likely to be done using robots because of the precision. And if robotic surgery is likely to have such a long, big runway, the companies that are producing those equipments are likely to do extremely well over a period of time. And that's where we are interested in. So these were the broad themes. It's not the only theme we are invested in, but these were the examples I wanted to give to make you understand as to what to expect out of this fund. And coincidentally, we all consume Netflix, we all consume Amazon. But how do we become owners of that? We can become consumer, we can become subscriber. But if you start becoming owners of that, history has shown that a product that you regularly consume and most people regularly consume, if you become owners of that, you actually lead it through a wealth creation cycle. So that's where we are. We want to participate in those themes, and that is possible through a global fund, which is an efficient, tax efficient way also, and regulatory way also is the most efficient way to participate. Coming to our sectoral orientation as well, it is true that our fund currently is tilted more towards information technology and towards consumer discretionary. Together, they are 70% of the fund, which is like compared to the benchmark being around 30-35%. So 30-35% in the benchmark, we have 70% because we don't really care as to how much is in the benchmark. But does not mean that this is a technology fund. It does not mean that this is a consumption fund. There was a point in time when the highest sector allocation in the fund was in healthcare. So our objective is wherever, whichever segment has the higher growth chart ahead of us and you have credible players to run on it, we will put the money there. So if we were to find better opportunities in different sectors, we would not really wait too much and shift gears. But yes, we are unlikely to be there in commodity sectors. Sometime, especially in recent few months, we saw some of the commodities and metals doing very well. But by nature, we are unlikely to be there in commodities because commodity players do not have any pricing power. Some external decision or an event takes place due to which prices rise and they benefit, and vice versa. If the prices fall, they lose out. We want to be in those companies which have some control on the pricing of their own products. So that's why we are unlikely to be there in the commodity oriented companies. So there would be phases where only commodity oriented companies are doing well, others are not doing well. We may not look very good in those short phases only. But again, equity investing and wealth creation is all about longer term. It is not about just short term. And the fund has demonstrated that in over 10 years of its existence. Coming to the geographical allocation, currently about 63% of the fund is in North America. If I were to break up, about 50 to 53% must be in US, about 8% must be in Canada. The emerging market allocation in the fund is only around 10%. We have also given in the slide that what has been the historical range, but that historical range is not the limit that is imposed on the fund. That is a statistical number. For example, if North America allocation has been from 42 to 64 in the past, that does not mean we cannot go to 85. That does not mean we cannot go to 20. It is all dependent upon where the highlights or where the high growth companies are. Let me take an example here. Uh, Amazon is the common example we all understand. The most profitable e-commerce platform and very large and very profitable e-commerce platform in Latin America is not Amazon. It is a company by the name of Mercado Libre. Should I not invest in that fund? A fund which is focusing only in US will be forced not to invest in that stock. Why? Because it is not a US stock. But my promise to the investor or our objective or a mandate to for the fund investment in this fund is to find opportunities anywhere in the world. And that's what we do. Similarly, one of the most profitable e-commerce platforms in China is Meituan Dianping, which is more of a combination of a TripAdvisor, a Grofers, and a few others like Zomato as well. So multiple things are there in it. So multiple such companies exist all over the world, and we want to take opportunities and invest there. So it's a mere coincidence that some companies are North American companies or some companies are European companies. We don't go by that. Most investors talk about the discipline or the strategy about buying companies. We also just spoke about that, what to expect in the fund. But not many look at what is the selling discipline. When will you sell and what happens to the stocks after you sell? We've said that if as long as a thesis is valid, as long as the segment offers high growth and the company is capable of delivering high growth, we will remain invested in that stock. If a thesis goes wrong for some reason, either because the underlying theme is not offering high growth or the company is not capable of delivering, or sometimes there's a big run up in the stock price and the company has already reached a fair value, that is the time we want to take the money out of the stock. But what we do is we also check once we completely exit a stock, after our complete exit, how did the stock perform vis-a-vis the index? And we are quite glad to note that majority of the stocks, after we sold them, actually underperformed the index. Just goes on to show that our batting average has only been improving over time. This is, I think, one of the very, very critical things for us. I mentioned that as long as the thesis is valid, we hold on to the stocks in the fund. That means the high growth has to be there for a period of time. The visibility of that has to be there for a period of time. If it is not so, we'll exit. And most of them, if the exit is there, most probably their growth assumptions were not really working there. That's why you'll see majority of the returns in the fund has come from those stocks that have been held for a long period of time. So, for example, Adyen has been held for over 3 years. In fact, the IPO only came 3 years ago. The stock has multiplied 7 times in 3 years. We have been holding Tesla for several years now. So it's participating, we are showing the contribution in the higher region. But there were stocks that we had to exit slightly early. There was a company in the who was making these robotic equipments, robotic surgical equipments. But at the onset of pandemic, we realized that a lot of elective surgeries will take a backseat because hospital beds will run short. So that assumption of higher growth was unlikely to work for 1, 2 years till the time this pandemic were to last. So we make an exit there also. So quite this is very, very critical for us. Hold on to the winners and cut out the losers in terms of their performance in the earning side, not necessarily on the stock side. I think these were broad stuff. Before I go on to the questions, I think let me share some bit to you for with you all regarding what's happening in the markets as well. Uh, Just a second, I'll try to share the other slides. I think let me cover two, three parts which are extremely important because anticipating that there's a lot of liquidity in the markets, I thought let me prepare this for you all as to what's happening and what is the key variable to focus on in terms of to understand where the equity markets are going in the world. I think the key slide there is this slide for me. We have read, heard, and understood that lot of liquidity driven up move and valuation is there in the markets. But nobody tells us how much is the liquidity. We all know Sensex is high, Sensex is 50,000. We are not going to believe if somebody says Sensex is 30,000. If Nifty is high, we know if Nifty is 15,000. But if people say liquidity is high, none of them can give any number to it. So that's what prompted me to analyze that. For proxy of liquidity, I took the money supply of a country and I added the money supply of top 12 countries and regions to get the global money supply or the global liquidity. And then I compared the global liquidity with equity markets. That's what is done in this chart. The white line that you see, it's a last 5-year movement. The white line that you see here is the liquidity chart. And the orange line at the backdrop that you see is the MSCI World Index. So simple to understand. At the end of 2016, there was a fall in liquidity and hence a fall in equity markets. Many of us would want to say it was because of demonetization in India and election of President Trump in US. Those are events. But ultimately, liquidity went down, markets went down. In 2017, there was a big sharp up move in the liquidity. And what happened to the markets? It was not just Indian markets that did well. Globally, all markets started doing very well. From early 2018 till about early 2020, that 2-year period, that liquidity hardly moved. It went down a bit, started coming up, did not increase meaningfully. Global equity markets also were in a range. But after the fall in pandemic March 2020, we saw a sudden sharp up move in the liquidity also, and correspondingly the equity markets also moved. Both equity and liquidity are at all-time highs. I would want to conclude, if this liquidity continues, the global markets, the global equity markets are expected to remain strong. Earlier, there were questions when there was less growth. Now, in fact, there is higher growth and more recovery also coming back. So we can only imagine if growth recovery is there, plus there is liquidity, the markets are likely to remain buoyant. There will be bouts of correction, but we need to buy out those bouts of correction. But how do I understand that this liquidity may be topping out or may not last very long? Two important factors that I'll discuss with you. First is on inflation. The Federal Reserve's target for inflation is an average of 2%. So if a few months inflation goes above 2%, they don't bother. But if it sustains above 2%, they will bother. The last reading on inflation in US came in at 4.2% for the month of April, but that was because of a low base last year. So May announcement was for April at 4.2. Next two announcements will also be on a higher side, anywhere around 3.5-4% because of a low base. But after that also, if US inflation starts staying above 3.5-4%, then that will raise concern that is the Fed going to hike. So far, that is not the case. Even including 4.2, the 2-year annualized return is 2.2%, which is again well within the comfort zone of Fed. So unlikely to disturb the Fed's action. And quote unquote, the Fed, they have said that we will want to have near zero interest rates for next few years. So that's what is more important. That's another thing that can be a lead indicator for inflation going up or Federal Reserve to move out is the fact that if US 10-year yield starts trending above 2.5-3%, this is the last 15-year movement of US 10-year yield. People say that things have gone up from 0.5%, the US 10 yield is at 1.6%. But the fact is, before the pandemic itself, it was at 2%. So it is not a very significant rise. But yes, if there will be alert, there will be alarm bells if the US 10-year yield starts settling above 2.5%, 3%. So growth recovery there, inflation, at least on a 2-year annualized basis, well below 2.5%, 3%, and US 10-year yield also below 2.5%, 3%. The going looks much better and in favor of risk assets like equity. But this within them, what kind of companies do well is the key. And this is what I wanted to show to you all. We did that analysis for the last 25 years for MSCI All Country World Index. So every country of the world is involved. We took out companies and took out which companies on a 5-year rolling basis had the highest earnings growth. And then we divided them into 5 quintiles. Quintile 1 had the companies with highest earnings growth, quintile 2 the next for 20%, and so on. Then we computed that for those baskets, how was the 5-year rolling returns for the stocks? And the result was not surprising. The highest returns were generated by companies which had the highest growth. Because there's a scarcity of growth, the highest earnings is given by those companies that have high growth. And that also is a validation point for the philosophy that we use. We are looking at only structurally high growth companies. So that's where I thought I'll let me cover these pointers. These are extremely important for us in the current times. And what is the current variables to look at? Most other variables, news is bombardment and doesn't really impact the investment making decisions. But we seem to be in a relatively sweeter spot where global recovery is also seen. And we do think that the high growth companies, structurally growing companies will continue to do well. I think I'll stop here and I'll pass it on to you, Akshay.
Thanks a lot, Alok. Very insightful. While we await further questions, I'd just request all participants to type their questions in the Q&A box. We have certain questions related to the performance. The first question being that how would someone compare the fund to a say MSCI All Country World in terms of alpha? Because globally index investing is a bigger piece and people tend to compare it with the index. So if you have some numbers there, I think that will be a very good thing to share.
Now, I can tell you this much that the fund has done exceedingly well. Since inception, the fund has given an alpha of over 10 percentage points. So the fund has been there since 2011. And in the world where majority of the investments are being done in passive way, wherein you struggle to just meet the benchmark, this fund has beaten the benchmark at an annualized rate of over 1,000 basis points. I just thought I'll pull up the global funds numbers till the time your next question comes in. I'll try to pull up that performance sheet also.
Sure.
Because I must say, when you look at our fund, PGIM India Global Equity Opportunities Fund, the 5-10-year return may not be reflective. Why? Because we started feeding into the PGIM Global Fund only from October 2018. So last 1, 2, 3 years would still be more reflective. Let me pull up at least that last 2, 3 years number. I think it will make some sense out there. Just a second. Is this slide visible, Akshay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Look at last 3 years. See, this 3 years number is more important because prior to that, it was not feeding into this fund. That's why I was trying to use a morning star to take out the global fund. I'll take that out eventually in our presentation. But you look at last 3 years, although it is not completed 3 years, it is what 2 years and about 8 months now, 7 months, because October 2018 was the start. But in last 3 years, while MSCI All Country World Index has given 14 odd percent annualized, this fund has given 28 odd percent annualized, and this data is as of 31st March.
Sure. So that implies basically a 13 to 14% kind of CAGR outperformance.
Yes, Akshay, 10% outperformance which I mentioned was in the dollar terms. So whatever benefit of rupee depreciation that also accrues to us.
Perfect. Great. I think that answers it very well. One more question on the box is about taxation of the fund. So I'll just take that. So the taxation, because any feeder, if an Indian investor invests, the taxation is debt taxation, which is for a 3-year period. If the investor redeems before 3 years, the taxation is as per the tax slab, and after 3 years, it is long-term capital gain at 20% with indexation. Uh, Alok, I have one more question for you.
Yeah, sure.
Is this forecast correct? US and EU markets shall continue to do well. Investments done in China as a percentage of allocation and background of investment. So two parts basically. One is on the US and EU market forecast, and the second being China allocation.
See what happens, Akshay, these days things have changed a lot. Earlier, when you had a European company, that company would be there in Europe and sell in some of those countries in Europe only. Similarly, a US company would sell predominantly in US and some of the other countries also. Today, things are different. Apple may be a US company, but tell me which country does not sell Apple products well? Microsoft is a US company, but who doesn't use a Microsoft? How many of us can actually do our work without a Word or Excel or PowerPoint? So, some of these companies are domiciled in US, but are truly global. So that's why that becomes very, very important. Similarly, China's problem is sometimes related to its relations with other countries in the world. But the companies in China, which are dependent upon domestic consumption, are doing pretty well. So we don't really invest in export-oriented themes of China, but companies in China which produces and sells in China, or the services which are to be sold in China, those are doing very, very well. So it depends upon which geography offers which kind of returns and companies to us. And some of the best brands in the world, most of them that we mentioned here earlier, were actually there in Europe. So we try to take out the best from every part of the world. And yes, over the last few quarters or few years, we saw some regulatory headwinds in China, and hence we had cut down some position in China. But some of the domestic companies are not impacted, so we have not cut down the position there.
Perfect. Thanks, Alok. Alok, one more question would be on ESG. So do you guys do a ESG study of the companies you invest in?
So, yes, we do an ESG study, although I may not have a ready score. But let me tell you this thing, most ESG negative companies would be those which are actually polluting the environment. So most of them are more to do with commodities and cyclicals. And as it is, our fund is not too much there in commodities and cyclicals. The technology, the services, the consumption side, the healthcare side, they are usually scoring very, very high on ESG. So although our focus is not ESG per se, but the end result is that our fund ranks very high on the ESG scores.
Thanks. Uh, what is the aim of the fund? Who is the fund manager? So I think you've touched on the AUM numbers, but if in perspective to the fund, the India fund and the feeder, if you have a ballpark number, I think we can maybe reiterate it.
I'll beg your pardon, Akshay, for that question, please.
Yeah. So the question is, what is the AUM of the fund? In terms of the India feeder and the offshore,
So the India feeder fund is about 1,000 crore now, and the global fund is about $5 billion.
Perfect.
4.5 to $5 billion is the number, and India has crossed 1,000 crores.
Sure. Uh, One more question is since most of the investments are in tech, please can you show numbers with relation to Nasdaq or FANG rather than MSCI World? I think the tech positioning is more transitory and bottom up.
Yeah. So there
rather
was a
than
time. There was a time few years ago when our highest holding was in healthcare. So at that time, I agree. Some of the questions used to be that why not compare with the healthcare index? So our beauty of the fund is wherever the return potential is there, the fund will go there. The fund is not married to a country. It is not married to a sector or a stock. I've just got the return for you, Akshay. This is the return numbers I could get for the outside. They are, again, you go to Morningstar and you go for the PGIM global side and you get it. Uh, the 5 years number again showed a return of excess of 14%. I'm trying to get the US one also. It will be there in Morningstar. Over the course, I'll try to get that too.
Sure.
But yeah, globally also it's ranked as the one of the top decile funds in the category. So performance wise, I'm sure there will be no such issue on the fund.
Perfect. Uh, what is the maximum we can invest as per RBI rules? I think through a feeder, the investor has a luxury, unlike an LRS where there is a limit of $250,000. Through a feeder, I think there's a luxury to invest, or there is no cap rather on the investment amount.
Yeah, there's no cap, and all the regulations related to ILRS, etc., is not required. So it is as good as investing in India. It's just that for taxation purpose, it is slightly different.
Perfect. Few more questions. US tech theme has dominated in the recent past. Could there be earnings disappointment in the near term considering high valuation of these companies, referring to FANG?
I'll give some interesting data around that. You know, when we say high valuation, first of all, I'm not denying that these companies are high valuation. Secondly, we are not holding all the FANG stocks, only few of them we are holding. Third point, usually by valuation, we mean P ratio. By design, by mathematics, P ratio will only look at last 12 months earning or at best the next 12 months of projected earnings. But it cannot capture the long-term growth trajectory of a stock. Google, for example, the Alphabet, 2003 or 4, their revenues was $3 billion. What will an analyst, any analyst, would project for its growth? 10%, 15%, 20%. You know, the revenues of Google now have reached $200 billion. It has grown 65 times in the last, what, 17 years or so, 16, 17 years. But very interestingly, FANG has Google also. Google's valuation now is 40 times on PE. In 2004, it was 100 times on PE. So looking at 100 times, a lot of people did not buy. Today it is cheaper at 40 times, although called expensive. But you missed out 65 times multiplication in the revenue and more so in profits. And even the legendary Warren Buffett had to accept this, that yes, I underestimated the ability of these companies to grow so many times. And he eventually invested in some of these tech stocks too. So I'm not justifying a high valuation, not at all. But we need to understand, there's a difference between knowing the price and knowing the value. We need to understand how long a high growth trajectory for a stock can continue. Another example, today also for online digital advertising, most advertisements are cornered by Google and Facebook. So these companies have something very great with them that others find it difficult to compete with. So then it comes to the subjective decision making as to how long that growth can last. And if you can judge that properly and see that through your vision of an investor, then you're likely to ride through the success of that company in terms of earnings multiplication. But again, I completely agree. The valuations are on a higher side, but the companies with higher visibility of longer period of growth are unlikely to be very cheap.
Perfect. Thanks, Alok. Alok, one question that we missed, and maybe I can start and then you can add on if you want to, is the performance of the fund versus comparable peers in the Indian MF space. If I just look at number one, calendar year returns from 2019, because the fund was repositioned prior to that. The fund has obviously in INR terms done maybe a 30% versus a 15% in 2019. The fund has again done a 72% versus a 16% India mutual fund average in 2020. Although there is this outperformance, and in 2021 maybe the fund has underperformed the India mutual fund space. The larger point here is diversification and looking at results which are typically very divergent with each other. So this becomes a very good complementary allocation into your portfolio, which can have a place, and with the outcomes typically are different from your home portfolio or portfolio which you already have in the India space. Uh, so these were some numbers. Alok, if you'd like to add something to that.
Yeah, I would. I'll try to share one more chart. In the meanwhile, I could search that for you. Let me open that up. See, this is the morning star table. If you look at total of last, concentrate on this column, 5-year column, we should look at slightly longer term. The return of this fund in dollar terms was around 26.5% annualized. I don't think any segment of our equities have grown that much. This is an annualized outperformance of 880 basis points. So 880 basis points outperformance, I see an index fund can never outperform. An index fund has to track the index, and then because of some expenses will be slightly below the index. Then if you look at the percentile rank across all the funds in this category, there are around 250 global funds across the world. In those funds, it is ranked in the top 5 percentile, it beating 95% of the funds with this performance. So I'm just trying to highlight that the fund has not just done well absolutely compared to the benchmark and compared to all the funds in the world. Top 5 percentile performance, I think, is something like a dream run. And thankfully, it's process backed, discipline backed. I showed to you 68 investment professionals, out of which about 25 are dedicated for this fund only. So I think that's working out and likely to work out because it is a method, there's a process behind what's happening.
Akshay, someone had also asked who's a fund manager, so maybe Alok should introduce himself once again.
Uh, I'm the fund manager here, but the actual funds are managed for this particular fund. They're managed in US, and yes, we do give our insights from the Indian side and what we are seeing in emerging markets. But primarily, this is managed out of US. And I shared that slide about Mr. Mark Baraboo and Mr. Thomas Davis, who have been managing this fund ever since the inception. And the fund got started in 2011, and since then they have been managing it. From my side, yes, I managed this fund, but the domestic funds are the ones that are completely under my discretionary, the likes of large cap, the hybrid equity and equity savings. And I also had the offshore advisory desk of our company here. So I have a lot of FIs who are our clients who I need to advise as to how things are happening in India. So that's what I do. And I think that was it. And I think something about me was already said in the beginning. So I think that should be fine.
Thanks, Alok.
Actually.
Uh, One question related to China.
Mhm.
How do you manage the risk of government interference and penalties in China or Chinese companies, like the recent one on Alibaba and one more? So yeah, basically regulation related to China.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Quite unfortunate, and that's why we tend to be little aware of those companies which could be getting even close to some kind of regulatory hurdles. And if we think that any of those can be heading towards regulatory hurdles, we try to stay out of it. So that's the way we manage. We had earlier had some exposure in Alibaba also. We had booked profits much earlier.
Sure. Alok, one thing in terms of performance is YTD performance versus the Indian peer set typically is divergent and is on the negative side. And there has been some amount of turmoil globally as well. So, wanted your views on that in terms of the performance and way forward there.
No, I agree, Akshay. I think this was a chart here. The fund was down about 9 odd percent in the this calendar year, while our domestic indices are up anywhere between I think 6, 7, 8%, depending on which index we are looking at. I must add the point here. The fund is not mimicking any index because it is having just 35, 40 of the selected stocks, whereas index has 2200. The movement will be different, especially if the movement is such where the structural growth companies are not doing too well, but the commodities are doing very well. In those phases, a similar phase that has been there in the last 4, 5 months, especially, or 4 to 6 months, In such phases, the fund may look like as if it is underperforming, but that could be short-term phases. Ultimately, we showed that chart to you that it is ultimately the higher growth companies that deliver longer term returns. The other companies, the commodity oriented companies, have a good time and then a lot of bad time as well. So we are not into that game of timing things. I would rather say this is not a problem. This is a solution. This is an opportunity to actually buy the fund almost a gold standard doing so well in the longer term, which is available at a time where it has corrected a bit. I think that's an opportunity to add in these times.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Alok.
Thank you.
Just look for some more questions if we have any. One interesting question is AI used in analyzing stocks and market movements to assist managers in making decisions?
For this particular fund, I will not give that much credence to AI. We may use AI to understand what's happening in the various markets, and there are country dedicated analysts within the team. So they may use a lot of technology to understand what is happening to make more sense of the data. But we are not using an AI to judge which stock is likely to do well and then accordingly trade on them, because the funds churn and turnover ratios is also quite low. So we don't really churn that much. We are, as it is, talking about not being interested in next 1-2 quarters or 1-2 years of growth. We're trying to look at longer term growth. And we might recall in 2003 to 2007, when Sensex became 3,000 to 21,000, we had 3 or 4 lower circuits also in that. So in an bull market also there are corrections. The victory sign comes when you buy out those corrections. So I think this is such a correction in this long-term growth territory that one should use to actually increase exposures.
Perfect. Okay, so there was a question on expense ratio and exit load, which I just answered on the chat. I think, Alok, thanks a lot for your time. I think we've managed to clock in or utilize that 1 hour very efficiently. Some just wanted to from you wanted to know your thoughts and some final remarks as to if someone's already holding the fund, is there an opportunity to add more, and if not, then but why should one add it for a 3 to 5 year perspective? Well, some last thoughts there.
I would definitely say that because there has been some correction in this category and in some of the structurally growth companies which had done well in the last 1 year, despite correction, most of the stocks had done very well in the last 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. This is an opportunity to add. It's not the end of the story. It's a pause in that story. And we have to, during those pauses, short pauses only need to buy. I'd like to just take a quotation from Mr. Legendary Peter Lynch. And he had said that lot more money is lost in anticipation of a correction than the correction itself. And here the correction has come. So in the correction, you got to add, but usually, human tendency is that when you're waiting for a 10% correction, after 10%, you want another 10% correction and so on. The best price to buy and the best price to sell never exists. So it's a longer term journey. In that longer term journey, if you are getting something at a discount and in a theme that you believe in, we clearly specified what to expect within the fund. If you believe in this theme, this is likely to do well, and this pause is an opportunity to add.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Alok. Thanks a lot for all your views. I'd like to thank each and every client of ours who have spared time with us, and also to Alok and Smita from the PGIM team for all the insights. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, all of you. Wish you best of health. Stay home, stay safe. Take care.